Welcome everyone to another NGA2D video interview series. Today I'm joined by James Baker from Graphene Manchester, and we're here to talk about the city of Manchester and how it's become a graphene city and what other cities around the world could do to emulate the success of Manchester. So for those who don't know, Manchester's got the National Graphene Institute and the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre, which focuses on both academic and commercial advancements. So a lot of work has been done to further graphene both academically and commercially in Manchester. So I'd like to thank James for joining me today. If we're going with the first question, so most here might know about what goes on in Manchester, but for those who don't, why was Graphene at Manchester set up, and why was the aim to make Manchester the graphene city?
So first of all, graphene was first isolated in Manchester in 2004 by the two scientists. You all know the story now, taking some graphite and some sticky tape, peeling that many times. So the foundation really was around that discovery in 2004, but not just the discovery, then the various experiments around the properties of graphene, which ultimately led to the Nobel Prize in 2010 for physics for Kostya, Novoselov and Andre Geim. Around that time, though, the UK was also looking not just at the science, but how could we convert that science into products and applications? And probably the UK has had a reputation in the past of great science, but not always had a reputation for converting that science into products and applications. So a number of conversations took place, and really Graphene at Manchester, as we call it now, was really formed in that there was a need not just to do science, but to also build the whole ecosystem, the structure, to take that science into products and applications. And that led initially to the National Graphene Institute, a £61 million facility at the heart of the campus of the University of Manchester, which is around bringing the science together. Then our second graphene facility, the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre, was more about the translation of that science into products and applications. So my responsibility as Graphene at Manchester is not an academic. It's really to work in partnership with industry, from small businesses to large businesses, from material suppliers through to products, through to end users, and to bring that together in a unique way to accelerate the adoption of graphene and 2D material products and applications.
I think I'm sorry, some probably, even though it's like the home of the graphene, like focusing such like large amounts of research, resources and commercialization efforts around a single material. What's the focus for that? It's because obviously it's a niche area, even compared to like nanomaterials in general. It's like why focus in on just one set of graphene materials?
Well, we tend to talk a lot about graphene as it being the first of the 2D materials and the Nobel Prize. But actually graphene is actually just one of over 100 other 2D materials, two-dimensional materials. So 2D for the audience, it's got length, it's got breadth, but at one atomic layer thick, you can only move it or stretch it in 2 dimensions to give you some orientation. So actually there's actually over 100 other 2D materials. And actually the science now is going into building heterostructures or stacks of layered materials. So building layers of 2D materials. So I often use the term graphenes in that not only is there more than one type of graphene, single layer, few layer, many layer, graphene oxide, top down, bottom up. So many different forms of graphene material first of all. But if you then factor in this whole family of other 2D materials, for me what we're really studying is how this 2D material and the properties at 2D, which are unique and different to that exist as 3D, really is starting to change the way we look at our material science. So really the agenda is broader, it's that of advanced materials. And then when you think of advanced materials, they go into aerospace, they go into automotive, they go into biomedical, they go into energy. So whilst you could argue it's a very narrow field, I would argue it's a very, very broad field because it's cross-cutting. Advanced materials go into many different sectors. And it's actually involved from an academic side, bringing together the physicists with the material scientists, with the engineers, and from industry, it's involved in bringing that whole supply chain. So yes, it's arguably one narrow material, but actually it's a very broad and very wide market and technology area if you look at it in a different way.
Yeah, and it's getting broader by the as the years go on as well, more and more expanding out in new markets. So, but yeah, no,
and again, just to give you an added example, I think last week Andre Geim's latest paper is on 2D twisted graphene, where he takes 2 layers of graphene and he twists them to create a unique structure that could have a real benefit in the future for batteries and supercapacitors. So the science continues and new things are continuing to be found every day.
Yeah, no, it is a good area, and it's just because some people would possibly question why one material, but when you look at it from different perspectives, it is a wide field for what seems to be a narrow field of material. So, but obviously, Graphene Manchester has been highly successful so far, with both the academic and the commercial side, both the geek and the NGI. And from speaking with people over the years, there's a lot of places around the world which are trying similar routes and trying to emulate what Graphene Manchester has done with the academic and the commercial centres for graphene. So from your perspective, what would you say is the best option first? Because many start with the academic research centres, like with the NGI, and then look to go on from building research output to then go to the commercial side. Is that the best route to go, like academic first, or should people actually just now, because we know enough about science, go straight for the commercialization centres?
It's a difficult question to ask because to an extent graphene is still quite young, 16 years young, compared to, for example, carbon fibre that took 25, 30 years. But as you say, already we're starting to see some really positive results for graphene in products and applications. I think the Manchester model, as we call it, is very much built on that academic foundation. So the model that we built in Manchester is very much fundamentally built around that, based in a university, based on fundamental, high quality, high impact science. So, a key deliverable of what we do today is still that fundamental science, not just graphene, this whole family of 2D materials, twisted graphene being the most recent example. So for me, that's a foundation in what we do. But what we've been able to achieve in Manchester, particularly through the GEEK, the Graphene Engineering and Innovation Centre, is to also have that translation piece. And slightly not to answer your question, is what that's enabled us to do is to do both. We can start at the fundamental work, and as that matures, we can then mature into the commercialization. But some of the partners haven't got the appetite for fundamental research, or they want something now. So we can also work with partners who want to start more at the front end of something they can implement tomorrow or improve their products over the next generation. So we've built a model where we can do both of those. But again, quite simply, innovation is a journey from discovery through the technology readiness level scale, TRL scale, if you use the NASA scale of TRL. And it sounds like a nice linear process. Unfortunately, my experience of technology readiness level is sometimes a bit like snakes and ladders. You think you've got something at TRL 5 or 6, and you think you're in commercialization, and then something doesn't work or something fails and you don't understand it. So the ability to rapidly go from commercialization to science or vice versa, for me, makes something that's very unique and very different compared to if you just had commercialization or you just had the science piece. So yes, you can start with just the science. Yes, you can just do the commercialization. But I think we've got something that's very unique that enables you to move very rapidly between low to high TRL, or if you're in high TRL and something doesn't work or you want to understand something, you can go back to that fundamental or basic science to understand that. So for me, we have something that's pretty unique around that, and that's what I think works well. But when we look in 5 years' time and we look back, maybe we can answer you more precisely and say, absolutely, it was a huge success and we wouldn't do it any differently, or we may have done it slightly differently, who knows. But at the moment, the signs are very positive and encouraging.
Good to know, yeah. It's just interesting because obviously a lot of people tend to start with the academic because it's easier than it is setting up commercialization. So it's just interesting to see where your perspectives lie. But obviously it's a bit of an open book at the moment still, because it's still a young material, young process. So it's, but for those who are contemplating, like, not copying, but emulating what Manchester has done, with building the centres and building the city around graphene. Obviously it takes a lot of resources to do something like this. So what, for anyone who's in the position of where they're in the process of setting these kind of centres up, like in other parts of the world, what kind of like levels of like funding and personnel and time should like people be looking at for building these centres, whether it's for graphene or a different material or a different set of materials, and like how much does like this rely on outside sources, so say government investment, private investment, to make it a success?
Yeah, very good question. And again, it links to your earlier question about, is this one area or is this a very broad area?
Yeah.
If graphene was a very narrow area, then probably the investment need would probably be smaller, because we're talking about everything from graphene to raw 2D materials, from physics to chemistry to material science. And we're also talking about many applications, and that amount of money you can spend can probably scale significantly. So I think a lot depends on the scope and field that you're doing. We've been fortunate that we've had 60 million for the National Graphene Institute, which was UK government money and European money in the time. So 38 million pound UK, 23 million pound of European money. The GEEK is another 60 million pound investment, 30 million from Abu Dhabi, a commercial investment. Sounds great about 2D materials, but for those who follow football or soccer, we're probably aware that we have two football teams in Manchester, and one of them is supported by Abu Dhabi, who also funded our Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre. So again, we've had significant government and commercial money. There's also the Henry Royce Advanced Materials Institute in Manchester. So significant investment in infrastructure. I often talk about what you really need around commercialisation is a three-legged stool. You need funding in the fundamental science. So you need to have some base funding in the know-how, the science, the engineers, the scientists, one leg of the stool. Second leg of the stool is really that infrastructure, the equipment. So on graphene, we've got the buildings, we've got clean rooms, we've got measurement equipment, X-ray, electron microscopes, as well as all the people in those, running them and managing them. And then the third leg is what I call industrial money, to commercialize, to scale up, to make products and applications. So for me, if you are going to do such a thing, you've really got to address all three of those. You need some skills, some talent, some IP, intellectual property. I think you do need some physical infrastructure to do things, to make things, to process things. Unless you're talking about artificial intelligence, which you can do in your home, you generally do need laboratories. So graphene is a nanomaterial. So we need the extraction, we need the gases, we need the clean rooms, we need the various chemicals. So that's a very important factor in bringing all this together. But at the end of the day, you also need that commercial money to develop or invest in the products and applications. So depending on what you're doing, I think you need to address all three of those. I think government money helped. It'd been difficult to invest £120 million in graphene buildings when graphene was still something you couldn't see, you couldn't touch, you couldn't make more than a few grams of it, probably as little as 5 years ago. Whereas today, you can now buy it by the gram, by the kilo, and by the ton. So you need a whole factor of things to take place. But we're trying to build that ecosystem of the university, the supply chain, the city, the government, the UK, as well as international partners in our model. So yeah, bringing all that together is different depending on what you're looking at. But I think anyone who's looking to copy needs to think of all those factors when they're looking about trying to do something similar.
Okay, so yeah, a lot for people think about, and I think a lot of, like you said, at the basic level depends on how much funding initially they can get from the government, because that I know from even other people, it's where they wanted to set them up, it's that's the lack of government initiative and lack of government funding has been a bit of a barrier. So initially
I
that.
agree with that, although just to just remind, going back to sticky tape and pencil, that was driven by curiosity.
Yeah.
So that wasn't driven by funding. Manchester still runs what we call Fun Fridays for the academics,
Yeah.
where they can actually do some experimentation, some fun ideas. In fact, with the NGA, I was out in America in 2019 before COVID, and we went to the Capitol Hill. And one of the Fun Friday experiments in Manchester was taking the colour out of whiskey. So they used a graphene membrane to take some whiskey, and through the membrane they were able to remove the colour from the whiskey to create a colourless liquid. And we're able to, fairly simply, but we repeated that live in Capitol Hill using a filter. But rather than whiskey, we used some bourbon, American whiskey, just to demonstrate what graphene might be able to do in the future in terms of, for example, water desalination. So Fun Fridays is a key part of what you do, but you're right, you do need that government support for research or for innovation to take some of this forward.
Yeah. The question is, though, how did the whiskey taste after it had been filtered?
Didn't
Did
taste the
anyone try
whiskey.
it?
I think if it had been the other way around, I could have converted water to whiskey. I'd been the most popular person there, but it was only a very small experiment, and we didn't get a chance to actually drink it because it was, it was done fairly quickly.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. I thought I'd ask and see anyway. Yeah, moving on from like the actual, say, like infrastructure and economics and of the graphene city and that. Obviously, since the centres have been set up in Manchester, there's been a lot of academic research, a lot of commercial efforts that have come out of Manchester. How much would you say like the output has been like on both the commercial and academic side within Manchester compared to if you had not set up the NGI and the Geek? How much would you say how much has the output been improved? I know it's hard to quantify.
So if I look at top level metrics, today in Manchester we have over 350 academics working on graphene and 2D materials. We've continued to get a number of high level publications. I mentioned the recent one from Andre Geim on twisted graphene. So it continues to bring together great science. And from my perspective, the NGI and the science thing has played a key role in bringing together that multidisciplinary science together. So probably traditionally we've had good papers from physics or good papers from material science or from chemistry. I think we've had an increased quality and output based on multidisciplinary papers. Again, not just from Manchester, includes international collaborators as well. So the National Graphene Institute, in my language, has almost acted as an accelerator, to bring together those academics from around the world. If I think of China as an example, we had a visit from President Xi a few years ago, and that brought a great interest in people studying in Manchester and wanting to do their degree or postgraduate degree in Manchester. So the National Graphene Institute on the science has acted as a catalyst, if you like, to bring together the scientists, to bring together new scientists into Manchester or partnerships, as well as attracted industrial attention. So we've had over 150 industrial collaborations since 2010, working through a PhD or through a project. So absolutely, I think it played a key role in improving the quality and the quantity of some of that science publications, citations, and activity. The Geek is only 18 months since its opening. Again, we've signed a number of additional partners from people like GK and Aerospace, through to Airbus, through to AstraZeneca. But we've also now increasingly working with a whole series of startups, small businesses. Because the Geek has labs and space, we can accommodate a startup or a spin out who might previously had a good idea, but wasn't able to do that idea because they couldn't get access to a clean room or to a fume cupboard or to chemicals. So we've now seen a real acceleration of commercialization. And our partners include people making rubber soles for training shoes. People are making graphene coated face masks. We recently launched with one of our partners an anti-corrosion paint. Another of our partners is doing a rubber enhanced recycled tires into a rubber mat, which is launching next week, Space Mat. So I think the buildings have been a real catalyst for improving and increasing the quality and the quantity of engagement. But more important, it's not just quantity and quality, it's reducing the timescale. So both NGI and Geek were built really around this innovation model about bringing people together, rapid prototyping, experimentation, fail fast or learn and move on. So what I call make or break, come up with a design, make something, measure it. If it fails, fail fast. Or if it works, iterate that design very quickly and move on. So we're really trying to accelerate, as well as the quality and the quantity of interactions, we're trying to accelerate the time it takes to bring a new product to market. So yes, they've been a key part of that, because without that, we've been talking a lot, but not necessarily doing a lot of the action.
I think it's just always interesting to know if it does have some kind of effect on output, and so it's good to know that it has done, and it probably will continue to do for quite a number of years. But also in terms like impact, like not even just like graphene and research, because we're talking about like building a graphene city, and we're talking about Manchester as a graphene city, has been able to develop Graphene at Manchester, the NGI, the Geek, and all these like spin outs, the startups, all the research, bringing researchers in. What kind of has this had like an impact on the local economy of like Manchester, whether it's like jobs or money in, and or that economic local authority kind of side of it, which is separate from the science?
No, we're certainly seeing some real positive signs, and we've already gotten some good indications. So, as well as the obvious of employing scientists and technicians and people in the buildings, that clearly are new jobs that were created based on that investment. Clearly there was the building of the facilities themselves that's created jobs, created work for the local builders and commissioning. They are really state-of-the-art buildings. If you get the chance, have a look online. The National Graphene Institute with its clean rooms, with its labs, it's won a number of awards for the building. But not just for the building, but the functionality of the building. It really is doing some unique and different, class 1000 clean rooms, dealing with this material. So jobs in that sense. But now what we're starting to see is a new phase where we are now starting to create jobs with the local community. So we actually have a program of work that we call Bridging the Gap, which is a European funded program which enables us to engage with local small business across Greater Manchester. So this is about engaging with companies who either have a product today where graphene might benefit or improve it, or companies who might want to develop a new product involving graphene. And it's only been going 18 months, but already we've worked with over 70 Greater Manchester-based companies. 35 of those have active programs. We've already developed some new, what we call products to market or products to the firm. So through graphene, we've given them a new product line or a new improvement to their existing products. And we're now starting to count the additional jobs that that's created. We're still early, but we've done a number of studies around this. And we anticipate that going forward 5-10 years, it could be worth as much as up to 10,000 jobs to Greater Manchester, a significant improvement in the financial position. But it's not just the direct jobs. In the Geek, we have something called an affiliate partnership. We've worked with National Graphene Institute, we work with lawyers, we work with recruitment companies, we work with marketing companies. So in the Geek, we have a number of partnerships because these new scientists, these new entrepreneurs need advice from IP lawyers. They need finance. They need other skills like project management. So again, we're starting to see almost creating a cluster or ecosystem of additional jobs into Manchester who will build, if you like, opportunities on the back of the graphene activity. So again, quite early days, but we are now starting to see new jobs, new value, and new products in Greater Manchester. Some of the companies I've touched on are looking to set up their bases and their factories in Greater Manchester. And some of our partners, we have a company called First Graphene, an Australian graphene manufacturer from Australia. That's where their base is, but they now have a base in the Geek. And if successful, there is potential to build a European operation in Manchester going forward. So starting to see that, and there's some good case studies already happening where we're starting to grow into those first products and applications.
That's quite a lot of jobs as well. And obviously, the more jobs created, the more indirect, local spending in the economy as well. So obviously, it's quite a lot going on there. Quite more than I actually thought. Actually, I didn't realize you was working with so much, so many around Greater Manchester with the with some of the initiatives. So it's quite good to hear. And good to see hopefully what will become in the next 5-10 years. So as you said, and how much more we will see and like effect and impact around Manchester and surrounding areas. So thanks for the detailed response on that. I just want to go on to those who are looking at making their own like research or commercial hubs, whether it's in America or Australia or somewhere else around the world, like essentially like a national research hub for graphene, a bit like Manchester is. Like obviously you've been involved with Graphene Manchester for a number of years now. What would be some of the key points of advice that you would could give to other people and the other people within the cities who are looking to set up a similar kind of operation? What key piece of advice would you give?
We touched a little bit on the interview, but I've often used a term that I use, and it's not a great term, but I use the term steal with pride. And what I mean by steal with pride is not stealing, but one of the great things of being in the university sector, not being a business, university is a charitable organisation, we're not for profit, and we've been able to go out and talk to people, and talk a bit like you're doing today, talking to me. We were able to talk to people who have set up institutes or set up facilities, and people have been willing to share not only what they've done and what they're doing. A number of people also shared what they would have done differently if they had their time again. So when I say steal with pride, it's not stealing, but we've gone and talked to people. So in the UK, they have the Catapult organisation. So they have something called the High Value Manufacturing Catapults. So there's a National Composite Centre in Bristol. There's the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre in Sheffield, Centre for Process Innovation, CPI in the Northeast. So we were able to go to them and to talk to them about their business model. We took our designers and our architects to their buildings to have a look at them. So before we built the Geek, we went and had a look at a number of these facilities. And people were open and sharing, nothing confidential, nothing proprietary, but they shared what they were able to do and what they learned and what they would have done differently. So the layout of the Geek is a result of a number of those visits, but as well as the catapults. We went to our partners in Masdar in UAE, and we looked at Khalifa University and Masdar City, sustainability. And we also looked at the Fraunhofers in Germany. And from the US, we also looked at some of the DARPA type models and some of the things like Skunk Works and Phantom Works from the aerospace and defence sector, and the initiatives like the SBIR initiative around working with small companies. So when we designed and developed what we call Graphene at Manchester, you'll probably see little bits that are mirrored from the catapults or from the Fraunhofers. We didn't copy anything totally, but we like this bit, but we didn't like that bit, or we like this bit, and we tried to bolt something together that's unique for Manchester. But there's little bits of copying that you may recognise or see from elsewhere. So we have a tiered membership model. So we have a tiered membership model where similar to the catapults, but it's not the same. So I think the advice I give is, there are some great models out there, some good people. If you are doing such a thing, then listen to this blog. Talk to a few people who are doing the centres, and I've certainly found that people are prepared to share and be open. I've already shared nothing to do with graphene, but with 2 or 3 other people who are building centres who've been to Manchester, and we've shared what we're doing, what we would have done differently in terms of how they're going to develop their centres going forward.
Yeah, it's basically cherry pick the bit you like from all existing centres and adapt it to what you want, basically.
Yeah,
it's a good model. I don't know. As long as you're not stealing directly, a lot of things are based off. Let's face it, a lot of things are based off cherry picking from what you like from one thing to another, regardless of what it is. So So on the obviously you've mentioned quite a few times about how you've managed to, help with a lot of startups and a lot of new companies, and help, like, with commercialization of new products and, new applications within Graphene Manchester. In your opinion, what would you say has been some of the most interesting applications that you've been involved with and with your industrial partners?
Gosh, it's so broad. I think some of the ones that certainly touch out with me is my background is aerospace and defence. So lighter, greener aircraft is a key area. Going back a few years now, aerospace is still quite a challenge for graphene because it's a new material in a highly regulated, very safety conscious market. But gosh, I think it was 2016, we actually flew our first graphene enhanced unmanned vehicle, a drone, at the Farnborough Air Show. That was quite exciting, bringing together people from Manchester, from University of Central Lancaster in the UK, a few small businesses, small companies, and we developed a graphene enhanced wing for a drone that we flew in front of, tens of thousands of people at the Farnborough Air Show. First flight of a graphene flight. They had to get quite excited by doing that. And since then, we've gone on to develop new versions, and we're talking to aerospace as an example. That was fun. Another area that I'm finding very positive, particularly during this COVID situation, is that around environmental sustainability. So the example I gave was space mat around taking waste tires that may go on a scrap heap or burnt to create pollution. Can we convert those into a value-added product? Again, so whole environmental sustainability, adding graphene into something to improve the properties. So mats through to tires, through to training shoes. Again, quite simple, but quite interesting to see. And again, it's not just the product. If you look at the Innovate training shoe I showed earlier, the athletes using those shoes are now breaking records in terms of running up hills, running across mountains. Because of that increased grip, they're actually doing the courses faster and breaking records, as well as the shoe lasting longer. So it's improving the environmental because we're not throwing away training shoes every 200 kilometers. So quite simple, but quite impactful in the short term. I mean, the ones that probably excite me more are the future aerospace ones. So a wing that can not only be lighter, but can de-ice, can achieve lightning strike protection, can even maybe have a hydrogen fuel cell contained within it. Really transformative across the aerospace sector. Water desalination gets everyone's attention. So having a filter where you could take dirty, salty, contaminated water through a graphene membrane to create drinking water. Clearly that has both commercial and world-changing possibilities. And again, we're working with a partner, fairly simple at the moment. The demonstration I talked about in Capitol Hill, a simple handheld filter is where we are today. But going forward, we're trying to develop these membranes at scale that could make water desalination a huge improvement. And then maybe the final two to talk on. One is batteries and supercapacitors. So I'd love to have a battery on my phone or a supercapacitor on my car, and then I could go longer range with my electric vehicle, or it could go faster or using a supercap. And then the final one, and I think you've talked to through the NGA series, is some great work in the UK, in Manchester and in America around biomedical. So everything from artificial skins to limbs to drug delivery. But again, it's some real interesting work. I know James Torr looking about severed spinal cord that then regrows on a rat. In Manchester, there's a couple of companies doing some post-brain trauma treatment, as well as potentially future people who may have had a stroke. Could we also re-stimulate the brain? So, gosh, there's a huge areas that are both quite interesting and exciting commercially, but a few of those that could really change the world we live in. And a topical one at the moment is, can we develop some sensors for viruses or COVIDs, and even virus protection? But again, I'm careful with that. Graphene has some antibacterial properties. Antiviral is a different challenge altogether. So, but yeah, biomedical applications for the future is something that could also really transform the world we live in.
So on that point, what you say about the sensor, is there anything being developed in Manchester regarding the graphene sensors? Because I've heard a bit of like hearsay and talk about it, but is there anything going on regarding
Yeah,
that?
so I think post-COVID, I think probably around the world, not just in Manchester, I think nearly every nation has put its focus into either a vaccine or into protection, PPE, or into sensors or detection. So there's a number of promising developments. Come back to earlier, the challenge we generally have with a new material or a new product is partly the science and the scale up, but it's also the regulation, the testing, the verification. So yes, there's some promising sensors, early stage, but one of the things you don't want with a virus is a false positive or a false negative. So before you have the assurance that you can use some of these new materials in some of these areas, it's quite a challenge to get them into the market in a short time scale. So I think the things you're seeing today are either things that were already on the drawing board or well along the drawing board or have been adapted for this particular virus or situation. But that doesn't mean there aren't any. If some of those come through, I'm sure most countries are trying to accelerate them and to see how they may bring them to market in a quicker way if that's possible. But it's challenging because of not just the technology, not just the scale up, but also the regulation and testing that's required before you go to market.
Yeah, especially in short time frames. And you made a good point about the false positives. Too many issues with a lot of current tests about false positive and false results. So I say we don't need a whole another lot of testing into the mix, which is wrong. So because I just want to obviously you mentioned before about moving back, to the centres in Manchester, about you have tiered membership, you have people who are in who use the facilities at like the Geek and that, as well as working with like the startups. Like how much interest have you been seeing from like both like the graphene industry and any end user industries that hoping to use graphene for like undertaking like commercially focused research at the Geek? Is the interest growing? Is it?
Yeah, so definitely the Geeks made a big difference in terms of industrial engagement, partly because it's more commercially focused, partly because graphene has matured a little bit more today than it was 2-3 years ago, and people are starting to see success stories out there. So 3-4 years ago, a lot of people in the industry were probably thinking, oh, it's a bit early, let's wait, I don't need to engage. So with the movement in the market, there's definitely more interest. I think COVID has partly affected that. So some companies, some sectors are particularly affected by what's happened with COVID. Aerospace sector is a good example. With a huge drop in new aircraft flying. So many of the aerospace industries are challenged, but we're still engaging with the aerospace sector because they're now looking at zero emission and then generation after next. So it hasn't gone away, but some sectors are very challenged. I'm actually quite positive around, within COVID, we've learned this new way of working using Zoom, using Teams, using WebEx. It was probably there before, but we never really used it. We wanted to do face-to-face meetings, but actually I'm seeing the pace of innovation and engagement increasing. We do a monthly webinar where we have typically over 100 users, but not only the 100 users who watch live, we also then record it and we play that on social media. So I'm actually seeing an increase in engagement with industry during and post this current COVID phase. So yes, there's an appetite from industry, but you've got to be able to demonstrate value. You've got to demonstrate new market, new product, competitive advantage. And we're starting to see that now. Today in the Geek, we have around 30 people working on projects with our existing partners, everything from paints to inks to composites to batteries. So a huge variety of projects taking place. And typically in an innovation cycle, you may get, 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 succeed. At the moment, we're getting a much higher quantity succeeding. But again, careful with that. It doesn't mean small project of 6 weeks as a final article, but maybe we get an improvement in 6 weeks and then we need to do a couple or more iterations to get to that product or application. So I've often talked about the tipping point in graphene commercialization, where we go along fairly incremental and suddenly hit an inflection point and you start really seeing an increase. I'm still expecting over the next 12, 18 months, we will hit that tipping point where you see that real growth and increase in applications and products. And that will, I think, also spur an even greater engagement, not just in Manchester, but across the world in graphene and 2D materials.
I think, and actually mentioned about tipping points, it is good to lead me on to my final question, which is a question I ask everyone anyway. But obviously with us reaching the going the tipping point and things looking more promising for the future, so what impact do you see graphene having in general society? What are going to be some of the key areas that we should be looking out for in the future?
Again, it's a very broad question, but I expect as we go to the tipping point, you'll increasingly see graphene in your products and applications in everyday use. I think the key issue is there probably won't be called graphene in the future, because as you get to the tipping point, it'll just be there doing something that improves the way you use things. But from shoes to clothing to your car to your aircraft to your battery and your engine. So increasingly it'll be there, but the ones where I think increasingly graphene will play a role is around sustainability. So we touched on a little bit, so more efficient aircraft through to more efficient electric vehicles. We're working with Highways England in the UK. We're responsible for the road network. So on the roads, so hopefully less potholes and less damage in the roads that you drive on. So hopefully graphene will be there, but you won't even notice it playing a role. But environmental sustainability is a key one. So reduction in plastics, recycling of rubber or recycling of aggregates, we sort of touched on. So if I can put graphene into a plastic to reduce the amount of plastic, or even take a biomass, so recycled food into a biomass by adding graphene I use for the packaging of my food. So again, you might not know it's graphene, but a reduction in plastics will be something that will really benefit, I believe, not just society, but the whole environment that we live in, and graphene will play a role. The ones then I think will really change is like the water I touched on, and things like some of the medical, if we can improve diagnostics or some of our treatments, again, that will make a huge difference to the lives in which we live. So yeah, graphene has a real opportunity to make a difference. It's one of my mottos in my career about making a difference. It's one of the reasons why I joined Manchester in the first place when I came across graphene. And yeah, it's really got an opportunity to transform, not as graphene, but by applying it in the right way to a product or application to mean we can do things differently, better, or hopefully using less waste or less energy in the future.
I think it's interesting actually. For all these video series, there's been a couple of on this one, because it's a question I ask everyone. So it's there's been a couple of common things that crop up. One is the environmental sustainability, and two is it's going to be the invisible additive that of the future, where it's going to be added, but we're not going to know it's there. It'll just be like the various additives we have in our normal products now. So yeah. It's definitely two common themes I'm finding through these video interviews as well. So yeah, that wraps up this interview on Manchester and the graphene and what it takes to build a graphene city. So I'd like to thank James Baker from Graphene at Manchester, and I've been Liam at the NGA. And until the next video interview, thank you and goodbye.